The Valthrine Dominion had ruled the Orion arm of the galaxy for 12,000 years. They were conquerors. They were slavers. They collected civilizations like some people collect old coins. Their empire stretched across 300 star systems, and every species they had ever encountered had bowed before them when their scout vessels detected radio signals coming from a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system. High Commander Zereth felt nothing but contempt. He was an ancient being, over 400 years old, and he had personally overseen the conquest of 17 worlds. This new species would be no different. Earth, that was what they called their world. A planet of primitive beings who had barely learned to travel between their own planets. Their largest vessel was a research cruiser called the Endeavor, and it carried only 200 crew members. Its weapons were so weak that the Valthrines considered them toys. Captain Danny Morrison stood on the bridge of the Endeavor when the first Valthrine warship dropped out of hyperspace. He was a 43-year-old veteran of the United Earth Space Force. He had seen conflict during the Mars insurrection 10 years ago and the Belt Wars 5 years after that. His hair was gray at the temples, and his eyes carried the weight of experience. His first officer, Lieutenant Commander Katie Hawkins, immediately began scanning the alien vessel. "Sir, that ship is massive," she reported, her voice tight with tension. "At least 15 kilometers long. Energy readings are completely off our scales. I've never seen anything like this." Danny stared at the view screen. The alien ship was shaped like a blade, black and sleek and deadly. It made the Endeavor look like a child's toy floating next to a whale. The communication came through moments later. The Valthrian language was harsh and grating, but the translation software worked quickly. The message was simple and direct. It was a demand for immediate surrender. The Valthrines wanted Earth to submit to their rule. They wanted humanity to become another slave race in their collection. They gave Danny exactly 1 hour to respond. Danny Morrison looked at his crew. He saw fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else. He saw determination. He saw pride. He saw people who would rather die than kneel. His response was simple. No. Lieutenant Commander Hawkins turned to him with wide eyes. "Sir, they will destroy us," probably Danny agreed. "But I will not be the man who surrendered humanity without a fight. Send a message to Earth. Tell them everything. Tell them what we saw. Tell them what we did. And tell them to prepare." The Valthrine commander received the rejection with disbelief. In 12,000 years, no species had ever refused them. It was so unusual that he actually laughed. These primitive creatures had no idea what they were dealing with. "Destroy them," he ordered casually. "Then proceed to their homeworld." The Valthrine warship opened fire. Energy beams powerful enough to crack mountains lanced through space toward the tiny human vessel. The Valthrines expected the Endeavor to vaporize instantly. They expected a brief flash of light and then nothing. Instead, something impossible happened. The Endeavor moved. Not away from the attack, but toward it. Captain Morrison had ordered all power diverted to engines, and the small ship dove directly toward the Valthrine vessel at maximum speed. It twisted and rolled through the energy beams, taking hits that tore through its hull but never stopping. "All hands," Danny announced over the ship's communication system. "It has been an honor serving with you. Today we show the universe what humans are made of." The Endeavor launched everything it had. Missiles, torpedoes, even the emergency escape pods packed with explosives. None of it was enough to seriously damage the Valthrine shields. But that was never the plan. The plan was the Endeavor itself. At the last moment, Danny Morrison aimed his dying ship directly at the Valthrine vessel's primary reactor. The aliens tried to move, but they were too slow. They had never expected a prey animal to charge directly at them. The Endeavor struck the Valthrune warship at nearly 1% of the speed of light. The kinetic energy alone was devastating, but it was the Endeavor's own reactor, set to overload at the moment of impact, that finished the job. The explosion was visible from Earth's moon. Both vessels were destroyed. 200 human crew members died in an instant. But they took 300,000 Valthrines with them. The last transmission from the Endeavor reached Earth 17 minutes later. It showed Captain Danny Morrison standing calmly on his bridge as fire consumed everything around him. His final words were quiet and steady. "We do not surrender. We do not kneel. Remember us?" On the Valthrine homeworld, High Commander Zereth received the news with disbelief. He had to watch the recording 3 times before he could accept what he was seeing. A primitive species had destroyed one of their warships, not with superior technology, not with clever tactics. With a suicide attack, they had simply aimed their ship at his vessel and rammed it. It was unprecedented. It was insulting. It was terrifying, though Zereth would never admit that to anyone. How is this possible? He demanded of his advisors. They are primitives. They have nothing. How did they destroy one of our ships? No one had an answer. Zereth's anger grew cold and sharp. He had ruled through fear for 4 centuries, and he would not allow some backwater species to challenge that reputation. The galaxy was watching. Other conquered races were watching. If humanity's defiance went unpunished, others might get ideas. "Send the 5th Fleet," Zereth ordered. 90 ships. I want their world burned to glass. I want their species exterminated. I want their name erased from history, and I want it done quickly. His admirals nodded and hurried to obey as the orders went out across the Valthrine Empire. Zereth stood at his window and stared at the stars. For the first time in centuries, he felt something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. It was not quite fear, but it was close. What kind of species charged directly into death? What kind of beings valued defiance over survival? What kind of creatures looked at certain destruction and said no? He pushed the feeling aside. It did not matter. In 6 months, Earth would be a dead rock, and humanity would be a forgotten footnote in history. The Valthrines had conquered 12,000 years' worth of civilizations. These humans would be no different. But deep in his ancient heart, in a place he would never acknowledge, High Commander Zereth felt the first cold touch of doubt. He did not understand what he had just awakened. He did not understand that humanity was not a species that surrendered. He did not understand that humans had spent their entire existence fighting and dying and refusing to give up. The Valthrines had just made the worst mistake. In their 12,000-year history, they had given humanity a reason to fight. News of the endeavors. Destruction reached Earth within hours through quantum communication relays. The crew's final transmission was broadcast across every network on the planet. Billions of people watched Captain Danny Morrison refuse to surrender. Billions of people watched him aim his ship at the enemy in charge. Billions of people heard his final words. "We do not surrender. We do not kneel. Remember us." The world went silent. For one long moment, humanity held its breath. Then something remarkable happened. For the first time in 300 years, humanity united. The old divisions of nation and race and religion melted away in the face of a common enemy. Earth had been invaded. Earth had been threatened. And Earth was going to fight back. Admiral Patricia Cole stood before the United Earth Defense Council in Geneva. She was 61 years old, with short gray hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her family had produced military commanders stretching back to the American Revolution. Her grandfather had fought in the Third World War. Her mother had commanded the fleet during the Belt Wars. Patricia herself had earned the nickname Iron Coal for her cold calculation, an absolute refusal to retreat. "We have approximately 6 months before their fleet arrives," she announced to the council. Her voice was calm and steady, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the end of human civilization. "Intelligence suggests they are sending between 50 and 100 warships. Each one is larger and more powerful than anything we have ever built." The council erupted in panic. The president of the European Federation demanded immediate surrender. The Chinese premier suggested evacuating 2 colony worlds on Mars and the outer moons. The Brazilian representative shouted that they should build weapons. Any weapons, whatever it took. Patricia Cole waited for the noise to die down. She had seen this reaction before. Fear made people stupid. Fear made people desperate. Fear made people forget what they were capable of. Ladies and gentlemen, she said quietly, you are thinking about this wrong. You assume we have to fight them the way they expect. We do not. She pressed a button, and a holographic display appeared above the table. It showed Earth, surrounded by the vast emptiness of space. They have superior ships. They have superior weapons. They have 12,000 years of experience conquering other species. Patricia paused and looked around the room. But they have never fought humans. In secret facilities across Earth, the Moon, and Mars, humanity's greatest minds went to work. They worked without sleep. They worked without rest. They worked with the knowledge that failure meant extinction. Dr. Samuel Wright was a 67-year-old physicist who had spent his entire career being called crazy. His theories about antimatter containment had been rejected by every major journal. His proposals for new weapons had been dismissed as too dangerous. Now, for the first time in his life, someone was telling him to build whatever he wanted, no matter how insane it seemed. You want me to weaponize antimatter? He asked the military representative who had arrived at his laboratory. Right. We want you to weaponize everything, the representative replied. Engineer Linda Patterson had designed the engines that made interplanetary travel practical. She had retired 10 years ago to a quiet house in New Zealand, where she spent her days gardening and playing with her grandchildren. When the military transport landed in her backyard, she did not even ask why they had come. Let me get my tools, she said simply. Weapons Specialist Major Chris Delgado was a quiet man with sad eyes. He had spent 20 years developing weapons that were classified as too terrible for use. Biological agents that could wipe out entire planets. Computer viruses that could destroy civilizations. Weapons that made nuclear bombs look like firecrackers. He had always hoped his work would never be needed. Now it was needed. I will build you what you need, he told Admiral Cole. But you should understand what you are asking for. Once we open this door, we cannot close it. Patricia Cole met his eyes without flinching. They murdered 200 of our people and threatened to enslave our entire species. Open the door. Across the planet, ordinary people did extraordinary things. Factories that had produced cars and phones and consumer goods were converted to military production within weeks. Scientists who had spent their lives studying peaceful applications of technology now worked on weapons. Teachers added new subjects to their classes: Valthrine biology, alien psychology, combat tactics, on Mars. A young pilot named Lieutenant Jake Morgan trained with the first squadron of a new fighter class. The ships were small, barely larger than a car, but they were incredibly fast. They were also designed for one purpose: suicide runs against enemy vessels. The pilots called themselves the Hornets. Jake was 23 years old. He had joined the Space Force because he wanted to explore the universe. Now he was training to die. We might not come back, he told his wingman, a 24-year-old woman named Sergeant Maria Santos. She was from a small town in Texas. She had the kind of fierce determination that made people follow her anywhere. Maria smiled grimly. Then we make sure they remember us. The training was brutal. They learned to fly at speeds that should have been impossible. They learned to thread their tiny ships through gaps in enemy defenses. They learned exactly where to strike a Valthrine warship to cause maximum damage. They also learned to accept that they would probably die. Every pilot in this squadron is a volunteer, their commander told them on the first day. You can leave at any time. No one will judge you. But if you stay, you need to understand what we are asking. We are asking you to give everything. No one left. Admiral Patricia Cole watched the preparations from her command center and felt something she had not felt in years. She felt hope. Humanity had spent its entire existence fighting itself. Every generation had produced new weapons, new tactics, new ways to kill. Nuclear bombs, biological weapons, cyber warfare, guerrilla tactics. Humans had refined the art of destruction to a degree that no other species in the galaxy had ever approached. The Valthrins had conquered dozens of civilizations. They had never faced a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the science of war against itself. They think we are primitives, Patricia said to her aide. "They think we will be easy. They have no idea what they have awakened." She looked at the star map showing the approaching enemy fleet. 90 warships, each one capable of destroying cities with a single shot. By any reasonable calculation, humanity had no chance. But humans had never been reasonable. 6 months, Patricia said softly. That is all we need. 6 months to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten our home. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was very, very angry. The Valtharian Fifth Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 93 warships, each one a city-sized engine of destruction. Their hulls were black as midnight, and their weapons could crack planets in half. Admiral Virith commanded from his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, a vessel so massive that it had its own artificial gravity and could house 1 million soldiers. Virith was young by Valtharian standards, only 230 years old, but he had already conquered 6 worlds. He expected this mission to be simple: find the primitive species, destroy their defenses, burn their planet, return home as a hero. He expected to find a terrified species begging for mercy. Instead, he found silence. No transmissions. No ships. No panicked messages pleading for peace. Just the empty darkness of space and a single automated beacon repeating the same message in the Valtharian language: turn back. Virith stared at the message and felt a flash of annoyance. These creatures did not seem to understand their situation. They were facing the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and their only response was a warning. "They think to frighten us with words," he said to his officers, allowing himself a small laugh. "How amusing. All ships proceed to the 3rd planet at standard speed. Let us end this quickly." The fleet advanced in perfect formation. They passed the outer planets without incident, their sensors scanning for any sign of resistance. There was nothing. Just ice and rock in the cold emptiness of space. As they crossed the asteroid belt, their sensors detected something strange. Millions of small objects were scattered throughout the debris field. They were too small to be ships, too numerous to be natural. Before the Valtharians could analyze them, the objects activated mines, billions of mines, each one containing a tiny amount of antimatter harvested from particle accelerators across Earth. Dr. Samuel Wright had worked for 4 months without sleep to make them. They were his masterpiece. The explosions began. Each individual mine was not powerful enough to destroy a Valtharian ship. Their shields were too strong for that. But there were billions of them, and they came from every direction at once. The fleet was forced to slow down. They wasted energy on shields. Their perfect formations scattered as ships tried to avoid the worst of the explosions. 3 ships took direct hits to their engines. 2 collided with each other in the chaos. 1 captain panicked and fled back toward the edge of the system. Admiral Virith watched the damage reports with growing frustration. "These pests," he growled. "Increase speed. I want to see their world burn before the cycle ends." The fleet pushed through the minefield, leaving 7 damaged ships behind. 86 warships continued toward Earth. It was still more than enough to destroy a primitive species they encountered. The second line of defense near Jupiter's orbit, 100 human ships, emerged from behind the gas giant's moons. But they were not warships. They were cargo freighters, the kind of vessels that normally hauled or between Mars and Earth. They had been retrofitted with engines and packed with nuclear weapons. Their crews were all volunteers. They knew they would not survive. Captain Benjamin Clark commanded the lead freighter, the Morning Star. He was 52 years old and had spent 30 years hauling cargo through space. His hands were rough from work and his face was weathered from years in the void. His wife had died on the Endeavor. She had been the ship's chief medical officer, and she had refused to leave her patients even as the ship fell apart around her. Benjamin had spent 6 months waiting for this moment. "All ships," he broadcast on the human frequency. "It has been an honor. See you on the other side." The freighters accelerated to maximum velocity. They scattered throughout the Valtharian formation like seeds blown by the wind. The aliens tried to destroy them, but there were too many targets moving too fast. The freighters were not trying to survive. They were trying to get close. One by one, they detonated. The nuclear explosions alone would not breach Valtharian shields. But that was not their purpose. The electromagnetic pulses disrupted targeting systems. The radiation blinded sensors. The debris created chaos. 17 Valtharian ships were destroyed, not by the explosions themselves, but by each other. Blinded vessels collided. Confused gunners fired on their own allies. A cruiser tried to dodge a freighter and flew directly into an asteroid. Admiral Sutrith stared at his tactical display in disbelief. He had lost 17 vessels to a species that did not even have proper warships, a species that used cargo freighters as weapons, a species whose people flew willingly into death. "What manner of beings are these?" he whispered. The answer came as his fleet approached Mars. The human battle fleet was waiting. 200 vessels hung in formation around the red planet. Most of them were hastily constructed, their hulls still unpainted. Many were crewed by soldiers who had trained for only months. They were outgunned. They were outmatched. And they were not afraid. Admiral Patricia Cole commanded from the carrier Unconquered. She sat in her chair with perfect calm, watching the Valtharian fleet approach on her tactical display. Her gray eyes showed no fear. "What? This is Admiral Patricia Cole of the United Earth Defense Force." She broadcast "Oh" in all frequencies. Her voice was cold and steady. "You have invaded our territory. You have murdered our people. You have threatened our children." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of all humanity. "You will receive no mercy. You will receive no quarter. You wanted war with humanity. Congratulations, you just got it." The Battle of Mars began. The Valtharians fired first, their weapons lighting up the darkness with killing light. Human ships exploded. Crews died. The first minute claimed a dozen vessels, but the humans did not retreat. They charged. Admiral Virith watched in confusion as the human fleet accelerated directly toward his ships. They were not running. They were not trying to maintain distance. They were coming straight at him. "What are they doing?" he demanded. "Do they not understand tactics?" His tactical officer was pale. "Sir, I believe they intend to engage at close range." "That is suicide." "Yes, sir. I believe that is the point." The Battle of Mars would last for 18 hours. It would be the bloodiest day in human history. And it would be the day the galaxy learned to fear a species called humanity. The Valtharians had superior technology. They had ships that could level continents with a single shot. They had shields that could withstand nuclear explosions. They had weapons that humanity could not match, even with 6 months of desperate preparation. But humans had something the Valtharians had never encountered in 12,000 years of conquest. They had the capacity for organized, deliberate self-sacrifice in pursuit of victory. Lieutenant Jake Morgan led the 1st Hornet Squadron into battle. His fighter was tiny compared to the massive Valtharian warships, barely larger than a car. But it was fast. Faster than anything the aliens had ever seen. And it was small enough to slip through the gaps in their point defense systems. Jake was 23 years old. He had joined the Space Force to explore the stars. Now he was flying directly into the engine core of a Valtharian destroyer, Hornet 1, beginning attack run, he announced calmly. His voice did not shake. His hands did not tremble. He had accepted his death months ago. The Valtharian point defense systems tried to track him. But he was too small and too fast. He rolled and twisted through their fire, getting closer with every second. The destroyer grew larger in his view screen until it filled his entire vision. At the last moment, Jake Morgan smiled. He thought of his parents back on Earth. He thought of his little sister who wanted to be a pilot just like him. He thought of the future they would have because of what he was about to do. "Remember us?" he whispered. His fighter struck the destroyer's reactor at nearly 5% of the speed of light. The antimatter payload detonated on impact. The explosion was visible from Mars. Jake Morgan took 300,000 Valtharians with him. He was 19 years old, and he died a hero on the Unconquered. Admiral Patricia Cole coordinated a battle that defied every rule of engagement the Valtharians knew. Human ships did not retreat when damaged. They accelerated toward the nearest enemy vessel. Crews whose ships were crippled did not evacuate. They redirected all power to weapons and kept firing until they were destroyed. The Valthrines had never seen anything like it. In their experience, species surrendered when the battle turned against them. They ran. They begged for mercy. They did not keep fighting when there was no hope of survival, but humans did. Sergeant Maria Santos was Jake Morgan's wingman. When her fighter took a direct hit that killed her engines, she did not eject. She did not call for rescue. Instead, she used her remaining momentum to crash land on a Valthrine carrier's hull. She survived the impact. Her suit protected her from the vacuum of space, and she had a plasma torch. Maria cut her way into the carrier's hull while Valthrine soldiers tried to stop her. She killed 7 of them with her sidearm before they brought her down. But she was not trying to survive. She was trying to reach the communication array. She made it. When Maria Santos destroyed the carrier's communication system, the ship could no longer coordinate with the rest of the fleet. Its captain tried to signal for help using backup systems, but in the chaos of battle, no one was listening. A Valthrine cruiser mistook the silent carrier for an enemy vessel and opened fire. The carrier was destroyed by friendly fire. 80,000 Valthrines died because of one human woman with a plasma torch and the will to keep fighting until her last breath. Private First Class. Lucas Park was a 20-year-old Marine from Houston. He had joined the military because he wanted to see the galaxy. Now he was leading a boarding party onto a Valthrine cruiser. His team numbered 12 Marines. They had cutting tools and explosives and small arms that seemed like toys compared to Valthrine weapons. Their mission was simple: hold the engine room, long enough for their own ship to escape. They held it for 6 hours. Wave after wave of Valthrine soldiers came for them. The aliens were bigger than humans, stronger, better armed. It did not matter. Lucas and his team used every trick humanity had learned in 10,000 years of warfare. They set traps. They used the ship's own systems against the enemy. They fought hand to hand when their weapons ran dry. When the rescue team finally arrived, they found Lucas Park dead at his post. His rifle was empty. His knife was broken. His hands were wrapped around the throat of the last Valthrine soldier he had killed. Around him lay the bodies of over 200 enemies. Admiral Varuth watched his fleet disintegrate and felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of warfare. He felt fear. What are they? He demanded of his science officers. His voice was no longer calm. His hands were shaking. How can any species behave this way? The answer came from an unlikely source. A Valthrine historian named Kethrix had spent the past 6 months studying the human cultural database that had been captured during the first contact. He had hoped to find weaknesses. Instead, he had found something terrifying. They evolved as prey animals on a death world, Kethrix explained. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. Their planet is covered in apex predators, extreme weather, and geological instability. Most species on their world go extinct within a few million years. Humans survived, not through superior strength, but through cooperation, tool use, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Vireth listened with growing horror. They have a concept they call fighting spirit, Kethrix continued. It is the belief that victory is possible, no matter how dire the circumstances. They have stories of their warriors fighting to the last individual. They have records of entire civilizations choosing annihilation over submission. Their history is written in blood and defiance. That is insanity, Vireth said. No, Kethrix replied quietly. It is evolution. They are not a species that surrenders. They are a species that fights until there is nothing left to fight with. And they are very, very good at fighting. The Battle of Mars ended 18 hours after it began. 37 Valthrine ships had been destroyed. 22 more were damaged beyond repair. Only 17 vessels remained capable of fighting. Humanity had lost 140 vessels. Over 50,000 soldiers were dead. The debris field around Mars would take decades to clear, but they had one. Admiral Patricia. Cole looked at the wreckage of both fleets and felt nothing but cold determination. Her face was pale with exhaustion, and her hands were steady despite the hours of tension. "This is not over," she told her surviving captains. "They will send more ships, and when they do, we will be ready." She looked at the stars, at the vast darkness that held an empire of conquerors. "They wanted to teach us fear. Instead, we taught them what fear truly means." The surviving Valthrine ships fled back to their empire with recordings of the battle. When High Commander Zereth saw what had happened, he sat in silence for a long time. 93 warships had been reduced to 17. A primitive species had torn his fleet apart, using cargo freighters and suicide runs and boarding parties that refused to die. For the first time in 400 years, Zereth felt his confidence shake. But he pushed the feeling aside. He was the High Commander of the Valthrine Dominion. He would not be defeated by animals. "Build the largest invasion fleet in our history," he ordered. "Strip every shipyard. Call every reserve. I want 3,000 warships ready within 5 years. We will burn their world and salt the ashes." But word spread before his fleet could be assembled. Other species in the Valthrine Dominion heard about the humans. Species that had been conquered and enslaved for thousands of years learned that someone had fought back. Someone had stood against the masters and survived. The Kethrani were an aquatic species who had been enslaved for 8,000 years. They lived in tanks aboard Valthrine ships, forced to perform tasks that their masters found unpleasant. When they heard about humanity, they began secretly contacting Earth through hidden channels. "We will help you," their message said. "Tell us what you need." The Morvathi had once ruled a beautiful world of forests and mountains. The Valthrines had stripped it bare, taking every resource and leaving behind a dead rock. The few surviving Morvathi worked in factories, building ships for their conquerors. They too reached out to humanity. "We have access to military installations," they offered. "We can send you plans, schedules, weaknesses." The Zelthics had suffered the worst fate of all. Their species had been reduced to a breeding population, kept alive only for Valthrine medical experiments. They had no hope of freedom. They had no future. But they could still fight. They smuggled out technical specifications for hyperspace drives. They stole weapon designs. They sent everything they had to the strange species that had dared to say no. On Earth, the gifts from their new allies changed everything. Dr. Samuel Wright worked with alien scientists to develop weapons that combine human creativity with advanced technology. He created bombs that could collapse stars. He designed missiles that could phase through shields. He built things that made his old work look like children's toys and never wanted to make. "Weapons this terrible?" he admitted to Admiral Cole. "But I want our species to survive. More than I want my conscience clean, engineer." Linda Patterson designed a new class of warship. The vessels were called Avengers, and they were as powerful as Valthrine cruisers. She built the first one in 8 months. By the end of the first year, Earth had 50 of them. Major Chris Delgado created something he called Project Prometheus. It was a weapon so terrible that even he hoped it would never be used. When Admiral Cole asked him what it did, he simply shook his head. "You do not want to know," he said. "Just pray we never need it." On Earth, recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. Factories worked around the clock. Schools taught children about the enemy they would face. The entire planet focused on one goal: survival. 5 years after the Battle of Mars, the Valthrine Grand Fleet arrived in Earth's solar system. 3,000 warships emerged from hyperspace, darkening the stars with their presence. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Every ship the Valthrine Empire possessed, every soldier, every weapon. High Commander Zereth had bet everything on this battle. He expected to find a broken species waiting for death. Instead, he found a force that made his blood run cold. 800 human warships hung in formation near Jupiter. 200 more vessels bore the markings of allied species. Behind them, 6 billion humans watched from their homeworld, united in a way they had never been before. Admiral Patricia Cole, now 76 years old but no less formidable, broadcast her message across all frequencies. "To the Valthrene Dominion," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. Her gray eyes burned with cold fire. "You came to our world seeking slaves. You found warriors. You thought to conquer a primitive species. You awakened an ancient predator. You wanted to teach us fear. We have taught you what fear truly means." She paused. The entire galaxy was listening. "This is your one chance. Leave our territory. Release your slaves. Retreat to your own space. If you refuse, we will pursue you across the galaxy. We will tear down your empire. We will free every species you have ever enslaved. And we will not stop until your name is forgotten by history." High Commander Zirith laughed at the threat. It was a hollow sound, filled with desperation he would not acknowledge. "Destroy them all," he ordered. The Battle of Sol lasted for 3 days. It was the largest military engagement in galactic history. Weapons that could destroy planets were used. Ships that carried millions of soldiers were lost. The space around Jupiter turned into a graveyard, and when it was over, humanity had won. The Valthrene Grand Fleet was shattered. Of 3,000 ships, fewer than 200 escaped. High Commander Zirith was dead. His flagship had been destroyed by a Hornet piloted by Angela Murphy, a 54-year-old grandmother who had lost her entire family in the first attack and spent 5 years training for this moment. She had smiled as she flew. Into his bridge, in the aftermath, humanity did exactly what Admiral Cole had promised. They pursued the Valthrenes. They liberated their slave worlds. They freed species that had not known hope for millennia. 20 years after first contact, the Valthrene Dominion ceased to exist. The galaxy looked at humanity with a mixture of awe and terror. This small species from an unremarkable planet had done the impossible. They had fought the most powerful empire in the Orion Arm and won. At a ceremony honoring the war's end, Dr. Samuel Wright was asked how humanity had achieved such a victory. He smiled sadly. His hair was completely white now, and his hands shook slightly, but his eyes were still sharp. "We have been fighting each other since we climbed down from the trees," he said. "We survived ice ages, plagues, famines, and ourselves. Every generation we find new ways to destroy and new reasons to keep going. The Valthrenes thought they were conquerors." He shook his head slowly. They were just another obstacle. He looked up at the stars, at the vast darkness that was no longer empty. "We are humanity. We do not surrender. We do not submit. We do not accept limits. And if you give us a reason to fight, we will never, ever stop." The galactic community learned an important lesson that day. They learned to respect the small blue planet in the unremarkable solar system. They learned that some species should not be provoked. Most importantly, they learned never to start a war with the most lethal species alive, because humans do not just fight to survive, they fight to win.